Hello, and thanks so much for checking out the Coin Stories podcast video page. I'm Natalie Brunell, and I'm talking to the leading voices in Bitcoin about their backstories, career paths, and their philosophy on BTC. This podcast does not provide financial advice. I'm excited to share my guest this week is the Wolf of All Streets himself, Scott Melker. Scott discovered Bitcoin while traveling around the world as a DJ, and he's now a major influencer in the crypto space as a trader, investor, and host of the popular Wolf of All Streets podcast. He also has a newsletter you can check out called The Wolf Den, and without further ado, here's Scott. Okay, Scott, I'm so excited to talk to you, Wolf of All Streets. Let's start at the beginning. I want to hear where you're from. I read that you're actually from Torrance, California, which is not too far from me, but then you were raised in another part of the country?
Yeah, so my father's a physician, and so sort of each of the kids, my brother and I were born wherever he was doing his education. My brother was born in the Bronx. My dad was at Albert Einstein Medical School. My dad went to do his residency in Torrance, and that's where I was born, and then got a job at the University of Florida when I was 6 months old, and we moved to Gainesville, Florida, which is where I actually grew up.
Yeah, so tell me about just growing up. Like, what was it like to live in Gainesville? Did you start thinking about wanting to have a career in music at that point?
I did. So I was obsessed with music from a very, very young age. My parents kind of joked that I would dance in the crib whenever they put on Fleetwood Mac. And I started playing the piano when I was really early and played competitively classical music. And I kind of burned out on piano in my teen years. Wasn't the coolest thing, I guess. And I wanted to play sports and sort of do other things. That carried me through to college. And in college, I sort of had a rekindling of my passion for music, but found it with DJing, instead of playing the piano. And that's when I started to DJ, and I DJed all the local fraternity parties and house parties at the University of Pennsylvania in West Philly. And then I sort of started to get gigs downtown in Philadelphia. I moved to New York, started to play there, and then it sort of blew up from there. And I obviously had the opportunity, very luckily, to tour the world for a good decade, just playing music and producing with a bunch of artists and things like that. But eventually, that comes to an end. I feel like, especially I was in my mid 30s, approaching my 40s. I had my daughter, didn't want to be away. I just felt like sort of like Matthew McConaughey in Dazed and Confused, they get older, or I get older, they stay the same age, I believe is the quote. That's how I felt about the people I was DJing for. I was perpetually like in a club with 21-year-olds or at parties with 21-year-olds, no matter how old I got.
Well, I want to hear a little bit more about your DJ career, but first, what led you to want to go to University of Pennsylvania? What did you study there? Because most Ivy Leaguers don't go into the music path.
Yeah, sure. So, and especially in the late 90s, getting a job on Wall Street or in finance from the University of Pennsylvania was effectively like collecting candy at Halloween. It was The recruiters all came to school. My big brother in my fraternity was the head recruiter for Solomon's Smith Barney. And he was like, "Do you want a job?" I said, "I haven't even put together a resume yet." He's like, "Yeah, but like my big brother hired me, I'll hire you." So I had a job offer at Solomon Smith Barney, but at the time, it just wasn't what I wanted to do. I had a superficial interest in finance, but just wasn't my passion. I actually studied anthropology and evolutionary biology, archaeology at the University of Pennsylvania with a minor in music because I wanted to be Indiana Jones from childhood. And then I went and did some digging and realized it wasn't at all like being Indiana Jones. I was just like the American guy that got to move rocks and shovel dirt. And, it was basically manual labor.
Wait, you actually went on digs like overseas?
Yeah, I did some digs all over the Middle East when I was in college. I spent summers over there. And like I said, it was basically 110 degrees and I was moving dirt, in a wheelbarrow. It was not as glamorous and sexy as it sort of looked like in the movies. And I lost interest quickly. Also, there's just very little you can do with that degree. It's just another liberal arts degree, become a professor or academic, but there's not really a career path in it that was particularly interesting to me. I just loved the subject matter. And the University of Pennsylvania actually had done a lot of the famous archaeological digs throughout time. And so my classes were in the archaeology museum at Penn, which was amazing.
Just out of curiosity, I know you mentioned your dad is a physician, so I assume you had a pretty good life growing up in Gainesville, dad being a doctor. So did you ever think about money when you were young? Was there something in your young age that might have kind of put you more in tune with sort of Bitcoin when you finally heard about it?
Yeah, I think so. So we weren't rich. I think it's sort of a misconception. We certainly were not poor. I think we were very middle class. The first house I grew up in, I think my parents bought for like $25,000. It was 1,400 square feet, and we lived there until I was 12 years old. My dad was an academic physician at a university, so it was much like being a professor at a university. He ran the emergency room there, but he was paid an academic salary. He wasn't in private practice, and actually, he became an inventor. And he has 40 or 50 patents and devices that have been used all over the world to save people's lives. And that's when I guess he started to make money outside of being an academic, and things changed. But I was very cognizant of money, I think, when I was younger. My parents believed in financial education, which is not obviously taught in schools in the United States, or probably most places in the world. But, they don't even teach you how to balance a checkbook. That was a thing back then, by the way, checkbooks. But they didn't even teach us how to, balance a checkbook in school, much less where does your money come from, how to manage credit and debt and loans, and all of that should be part of financial education. But even when I was early 12, 13 years old, my parents' friend, like as gifts, would give me stocks. I started to learn how to buy stocks. I bought Disney and Caterpillar shares that I still hold to this day, actually, 30 years later. And so I was interested from an early age, and I learned about investing and the importance of putting your money away. And you have to remember, this was the late 80s, early 90s, when you could put money in a savings account and earn 10% a year.
Totally. Well, so, becoming a DJ then, did you kind of go down that path because it was something you were doing in school and clearly you enjoyed it and other people liked your music? Or did you think, no, I can actually make a living doing this?
A little bit of both. So my parents always empowered me, I think, to follow my passions. They really believed that that was more important and that the money would come. They were just incredible, and so I joked that my parents must have been very disappointed that I chose to become a DJ after college, but actually they were very supportive. They flew all over the world to see my shows, which was pretty incredible as far as Japan. And so, I figured that if I loved it enough and I worked hard enough, that I would make a living, but it certainly did not make me wealthy, and for years it was a struggle. I graduated University of Pennsylvania. 2 years later, I moved to New York, and on the side between my few gigs, I was delivering packages for my friend's advertising agency, like in the freezing cold, literally walking down the street with like 3 packages in the snow for $500 a week when my rent was like $3,000 a month or something.
No way.
So I've been through definitely the struggle, and not to say, once again, I had a very fortunate life. I think I had a safety net. Like I was not going to end up homeless if I didn't work, but that was, my situation was I really hustled to become a DJ. I was the guy selling mixtapes on the corner of Broadway and Canal. Definitely, I went through the whole life cycle of success and failure.
So, of course, I have to ask you, who were your music influences at that time, and how did you really get your career going from being something you did on the side with gigs that paid your bills to all of a sudden it's more full time?
So I was in Philadelphia, luckily, during the years that I really became a DJ, like 95 to 2003. And that was just a huge, huge period for DJing in Philadelphia. So you had like this whole hip hop movement led by the DJ Jazzy Jeffs and Cash Moneys and all these very famous hip hop DJs. But then you also had like Josh Wink in the house scene and King Britt and those guys. And then the drum and bass scene was blowing up there with Diesel Boy. And so it was just an incredible time. And every night you'd go out and it would just be like you're opening for this guy or this guy and trying different genres and all these things. But I was always at my heart like a hip hop DJ. I love to mix hip hop with rock and do like really creative, strange things. So AM was a huge influence on me. DJ AM, who unfortunately obviously passed away, but he was from Philly and I had the opportunity to play with him a number of times. Jazzy Jeff was a huge influence. And I think it just built to a point where it was a sustainable living in New York City. I could DJ 4 or 5 nights a week and easily get by. And then in 2006, a guy heard me DJing at a bar and he said, I want you to come audition for this tour in Japan. And so I show up and there's like 20 DJs in the lobby. And I go in and I audition and I got this job, and it was a tour with an artist called Toshi Kubota in Japan. And he's sort of the Michael Jackson of Japan. When I was auditioning, I didn't really quite know how big it was. And so I spent the next 6 months in Japan on a tour of 35 Japanese cities, playing literally stadiums, right? And so like I was opening the show for him, and then I was the DJ and percussionist in his band. So throughout the whole thing. And so that's where it really kind of took a major turn. That was when like I got paid enough for that one job to pay off all my debts and kind of reinvest and start actually trading again and things like that. So it was a huge moment.
Yeah, that must have been exciting. So, I mean, is that what led you to being able to um, play alongside people like Enrique Iglesias and Wiz Khalifa and all that?
To some degree. So years later, at that point, I was really just DJing. I was producing music and stuff, but I started sort of this mashup remix project called the Melker Project. And that went really viral, like a few of the things I put out. And that's when I like, had a established manager and agent and really was like sort of in the scene. And that's how I ended up, sort of headlining or either being like the headliner at a smaller kind of music festival or college show or opening for people like the ones you named. And so it just sort of built up and built up. And I ended up with these just insane, crazy opportunities. Like, right towards the end, actually, was when I was playing with Enrique. I was opening for him in like festivals in South America and stuff. It's just incredible.
And you kept your name the whole time? You didn't have like a DJ name?
I never had a DJ name. In college, I was DJ Pookie. But beyond there, I never, because it was my nickname, unfortunately, from New Jack City, the little crackhead Chris Rock. That's what my friends thought of me when I was in college, apparently. But yeah. But no, I just used my name.
I'm going to play your top Spotify song.
Oh, there you go. So yeah, and the funny thing is that's so most of my stuff wasn't on Spotify because it's bootlegged, right? So anything where you sampled, it doesn't end up on Spotify. So, and actually, one of the main things that ended my career was copyright lawsuits for sampling. And that got my SoundCloud account taken down, which had tens of millions of listens. And that, so like everywhere my music had ever been embedded on the internet was through SoundCloud links, and they got taken down. And it was, so that was sort of when a big turning point for me. But yeah, the funny story behind that song is for Nervo. It was a remix that and they never paid us or anything. It ended up being a radio hit, just classic music industry nonsense. And that was probably that song that I produced, you just played, was probably the least indicative of my actual music style. It was one of those things where I was like, yeah, I'll sell out and do an EDM remix for money. And I did it, and it blew up, and like I didn't even ever play it once in a show. Right?
That's crazy. And yeah, it's like the top song for you as an artist on Spotify. But wait, can you go into that? I mean, I never read that about you, the copyright issues. I'm kind of curious just because we hear so many samples in songs today. So how does that become an issue?
Like when I was coming up and in the 90s, early 2000s, you could basically sample anything free of concern. I mean, there were some retroactive lawsuits and things like that, but it was very common practice, obviously. Every hip hop beat from the 90s is a sample of some sort, right? And most of those were never cleared. And, you could make the argument if you're remixing something, I was giving credit, and that you were driving sales for the originals of those songs. Actually, if they were open-minded in the music industry, they would have realized that we were promoting dead catalog, right? Like you bring back some song that nobody's listened to in 30 years and you make a successful remix, they're getting royalties on every time that song is played, people buying it. Yeah. But Universal Records is notorious for being really aggressive with claims. And SoundCloud was a very open, sort of decentralized platform. It was almost like at that point, no rules, much like we would view Bitcoin or decentralized platforms now. But then the labels cracked down and SoundCloud had to start taking people's music down and artists. And I was a part of this just huge sweeping thing and cease and desist from Universal Records. And so I had a lot of problems. I made the mistake of like doing a full remix project of the Beatles. I probably should not have touched their catalog and like put it out there, and it went kind of viral. So I think it gave me kind of the wrong kind of attention. But it was interesting. I had these situations where I would remix something, the artist would actually support it, and then the label would have it taken down. Wow. So like I did a whole Hall & Oates remix project that went pretty viral called Ball & Oates. And John Oates, like in an article on Billboard, was like, I love this thing. This is the spirit of music. They sampled it. He used our music. And then their label like attacked it and had it taken down because they wanted the royalties.
Well, so did that cause you to transition your career away from DJing? What happened?
I think it was just a confluence of a lot of events. Like I said, my daughter was born right around that time. For me, it would have been like starting over to get my music back. My team put some of it on YouTube and things like that. But then we obviously got the copyright claims there and the same issues. And I was just getting old. I felt like I aged out of it. I didn't have the passion for it anymore. And so it was just time to move on. And that happened to be like within a year of me discovering Bitcoin and crypto. I'd always loved trading, although I was not particularly good at it, like most people. And that's a skill that I really honed in those years, kind of late 2016, early 2017. And I was just there at the right time. Like, I'm not going to pretend that I was some trade god or anything. Everybody who was there in late 2016, early 2017 made a lot of money, right? And so that allowed me to completely, fully transition to crypto. I haven't even touched my turntables in literally years. After doing it for decades, it's very weird, but I'm the kind of person who, once I shut it off and find a new passion, I go all in. And that's what I did on my Twitter as well. I just stopped talking about music. I lost half my followers. And then I started talking about crypto, and it built up again.
So how did you actually discover Bitcoin?
Well, funny. And I think 2012 or 13, someone offered me to pay me for a gig in Bitcoin.
Oh,
And
please tell me you took it.
Oh, I said no. I said I want money. But what's Bitcoin? Knowing me, I would have sold it a long time ago, or I would like to pretend that I would still have it now, but we all know that that would be very unlikely. But no, I needed, money to pay my bills. And so I asked for money. That was the first real, I guess, time that I had heard about it that I can recall. But really in 2016, a lot of the DJ community was pretty passionate about crypto. I think they were very early to it, ahead of the huge, I guess, retail mania in 2017. And one of my friends, we had a project we were producing together. We were signed to Tommy Boy Records at the time. And he started talking to me about Ethereum and Ripple. Those are the first two that I remember. And so he was like, you got to buy some Bitcoin first to buy these. And so I went down, I bought some Bitcoin. I went on Bittrex. I had no idea what I was doing, trading Bitcoin pairs, because back then there was no USD pairs. Everything was denominated in Bitcoin, stacking sats. And obviously, like, I bought Ethereum, I don't know, $30, and Ripple fractions of a penny. It was insane, And so months later, those had all done these huge multiples, and I got very passionate about it very quickly.
When did you go down the rabbit hole? Like, did you start studying Bitcoin and Austrian economics and starting to think that our whole system is really messed up and Bitcoin could solve a lot of the problems we have?
Sure. So those were ideas that had been implanted in me long before, sort of starting in college, and I'd been down the rabbit hole a bit. But I'm not going to pretend that when I came to crypto, that was the reason. I came because I wanted to trade, and because it was this mythical land of 100x pumps and unicorns. And so I think, like many people, as it grew fast in 2017, I started to really study it. And then, to be quite frank, after things went badly, the bear market is where a lot of us, I think, found our true passion for it, because you were sitting there watching your investment obviously go down. I had sold a lot and taken enough profit to at least not be miserable about it. But, and that's when I started to realize, wow, this is actually an earth-shattering technology innovation that, will never probably be matched in our generation, and became very, very passionate about Bitcoin and the importance of it. And even with that sort of first few years of feeling that way, 17, 18, 19. And even after, like, I guess, becoming an influencer in the space and starting to talk about it a lot, COVID really set it over the edge for me. And I think a lot of people, because, just really seeing all of our nightmares play out on a global stage, with stocks only going up and Main Street being miserable and broke. People can't get jobs, but executives are taking their bonuses, and 33% of the money supply of history printed in a year. You had to be able to step back, even as your average person, and say that this is wrong. So if you already had the education on Bitcoin and crypto, it's very clear to put that together, that was a solution to those problems.
Yeah. So, well, when you mention influencer, I mean, you have become so big in this space. And I'm curious how that climb happened for you, because I also got into Bitcoin in 2017, but I certainly wasn't making content about it. So when did you become the wolf of all streets and sort of start to build a following and put your thoughts and messages out there?
So the Wolf of All Streets was a joke. When I started talking about crypto instead of music, I got a lot of pushback, right? And so I would constantly get these comments: shut up, go back to DJing. You're just a DJ. What do you know? And it's sort of, I would start talking about the fact that nobody should be able to put you in a box. All of us are multifaceted human beings. Everybody has more than one talent, and you can't just tell someone that they should do one thing, And so, jokingly, one day I just changed my name on Twitter to the Wolf of All Street, saying I could do everything, complete joke. And people immediately started calling me Wolf, like all the groups I was in and stuff, and it just stuck. So I left it. It sort of became this brand. Unfortunately, a lot of people think I was naming myself literally after the Wolf of Wall Street. That's not something I was trying to emulate. So that's been hard to shake at times. But I think that brand just sort of stuck. But I think it was really, I was in a lot of Discord groups in 2017 and 18, and that's where I sort of started really getting passionate about it, and I guess gaining a following. And that translated to my Twitter. I was very lucky, I'm not anonymous, so I think that helps, as you know, like to have your real face and name elicits, I guess, a bit of trust, whether deserved or not. And I had the blue check for music from like 2011. Or 2012. I've been on Twitter since before Bitcoin was invented, right? Yeah. It was like my favorite platform for talking about music. And so I started a newsletter almost 2 years ago. So like 2019 was the first time that I did something off of Twitter, because to me, Twitter felt very short form. And I would find myself writing these like books on Twitter, and back then, even at that time, they still had the shorter tweets.
Yeah.
They hadn't even expanded.
And did you do the newsletter with a company, or did you go off on your own?
I did on my own. So there's review. I started writing for Cointelegraph, and I was enjoying writing. And so I found this platform, Review, kind of a Substack competitor. It was actually bought by Twitter, which is really cool. But so they're part of Twitter now, fortuitously. And I just started writing a free newsletter because I felt like it was an easier way to sort of share my thoughts. Then that became like a full-time job. I was doing this free newsletter for months, and I was so passionate about it, but I was doing everything. So I was like, I'm going to still keep a free version, but I'll charge $15 a month so that like can be a job and something I can justify. And that became successful. And then Blockworks, I don't know if you know them, but they reached out to me about doing a podcast. I didn't even know what a podcast was, to be quite frank. Wow. And I just showed up and started recording podcasts. And, and from there, it's just the way I am. It was all sort of organic growth. Nothing was ever planned. From there, I was like, the podcast is cool, but that's like hour-long content. I want to go do some other charting and stuff. And I started YouTube this year, and it sort of just all has compounded into this content machine. And I'm a little overwhelmed, to be quite frank. I mean, I do so much on a daily basis, but it's fun.
Well, yeah, no, I feel you. And it's your videos and your interviews with people like Michael Saylor, how I found you, because I was doing research on other guests. And so I came across you. So it's really cool to hear the whole backstory. But I'm kind of curious to talk to you just about your views on the whole crypto space, because there are a lot of maxis, right? And it seems like you're also into Ethereum and other, investment strategies when it comes to crypto. So can you talk a little bit about that and what your thoughts are on people that are only Bitcoin?
So I think all credit to the success of Bitcoin is due to maximalism and those people who have been maximalists from the beginning. I don't think that we would have advanced the ball this far. I don't think that we would be on the main stage, so to speak, headlining the festival, if not for the maxis. But I also believe that maximalism in all of its forms, certainly not just specific to Bitcoin, sports, religion, nationalism, your coin, all of those, I think, are unfortunate, because it's sort of like you're getting stunted in your growth at a certain point and not open-minded or accepting of the fact that things can improve. And who doesn't want things to improve? I don't think Bitcoin can be improved, but I don't think that means that no other cryptocurrency can possibly exist, especially if it has an utterly different use case. I know that there's a battle between the Bitcoin and Ethereum communities, but to me, that would be akin to like gold maximalists fighting with Amazon maximalists, and the two have absolutely nothing to do with each other. One is a store of value, one is a company or a platform, it's advancing technology. I view Bitcoin as a store of value, the most important asset that's ever been created. I intend to stack sats until I'm dead, leave them to my children, tell them to stack sats until they're dead and leave them to their children. I'm not selling it, right? But that doesn't mean I'm not aware that Ethereum is akin to the opportunity to invest in the internet in the early 90s, right? And that's a platform that's going to change the way that we exchange value. And I don't see them as competitive. I don't even see them as similar beyond the fact that they're both blockchain based and proof of work. So for me, I love the idea of a shiny new thing. I think that it's fun to go out and try to find the next one and to really research and go down the rabbit hole of all these other use cases. And that takes nothing away from Bitcoin in my mind. So yeah, I think maximalism is important because you don't get to the mainstream without it. But I think it just doesn't work for me.
Yeah. Well, while we're on the topic, what are some projects that you are excited about? Because I do find it interesting when I listen to some of the other interviews. I just heard one with Raul Paul where he was talking about Solana and Cardano. So, and for the people out there that listen to my show who are interested in some of the other currencies, what are your thoughts?
So, it's tough when you have a big audience to go as far down, perhaps the risk curve as you would like to talk about things. So I like to keep it to the larger caps when I discuss it. But I actually have an interview coming out with Raul, or that will be out by the time this comes out. My second one with him, where we discussed all those same things. And I think we're largely in agreement about a lot of what you just said. I think just like the case I just made for Ethereum, an opportunity to sort of invest in the internet in the early days, why not invest in every competitor and every layer one now while you have the opportunity? And if one of them becomes truly successful and 3 or 4 of them die, I think you'll more than compensate the losses on the 3 from the one that succeeds. So I love Solana. I love Elrond. I'm a huge fan. I've been since the very beginning. I love Avalanche, AVAX, DOT. So these are things that I'm pretty heavily invested in, all of them.
Wow.
And once again, I know there's people who are maximalists about each one. I don't see an Ethereum killer. I don't see a world where one of them dominates and rules everything. I think each one will find its ideal use case. And then platforms like Cosmos, which I love as well, Atom, Kava, DOT as well, that focus on interoperability and allowing these blockchains to talk to one another, I think they will be a huge, huge boon for the space, because then you don't have to just, if you don't like Ethereum's fees and you don't like that it's slow, you can use one of these other ones, but you'll still be able to talk to Ethereum and exchange value from Ethereum to a faster blockchain.
Have you ever had your followers sort of say that Bitcoin, especially for people just learning about it this year, feels out of reach because of its price and they don't even want to go into it? They feel like they should trade maybe these altcoins because there is the potential that one of them takes off and it's like an 8,000% return.
Yeah. And I tell them that you're going to probably lose everything. Right. So as much as I love trading and I've traded my way to a pretty decent portfolio, new people that come to me, I tell them slowly buy Bitcoin, dollar cost average, invest, don't touch it. That's what you should do. Once you've been doing that for a long time, maybe look at Ethereum. Once you've looked at Ethereum and gotten comfortable, maybe go down this risk curve a little bit. But somebody should not be all in on any of these coins. I talk about being bullish on them, but they're very small percentages of my portfolio. 70% of my portfolio is always basically Bitcoin and Ethereum, that I'm not touching.
Do you think that there's any risk to Bitcoin? One thing that I've talked about with my guests is just that idea of, the black swan that we can't predict. But are you concerned about any potential threat or government interference or regulation?
There's nothing that I'm specifically concerned about, but I'm also not dumb enough to believe that it's perfect and nothing could harm it. Right. And that's true of, I think, anything in life. So I think Bitcoin's as sure a bet as you can get at this point, but nothing's 100%. I certainly believe the risk of a state level attack diminished dramatically with China banning Bitcoin mining and pushing so much of the Bitcoin infrastructure out of China. I think that was China's opportunity, honestly, to control the network, or if they ever wanted to, quote unquote, kill Bitcoin. I don't think it was possible, but they could have made it very, very difficult. And I think they just went the other way. So I'm less concerned about a state level attack, which would have probably been the biggest threat at that point. I'm not a techie. I mine as a retail miner through Compass Mining, but I've never set up a rig. I don't understand the algorithms. The only thing that would fundamentally shake my thesis would be a successful attack on the network that changed my feeling on the security of it. Something that fundamentally altered sort of the thesis of what Bitcoin is. Regulation doesn't scare me. I think heavy-handed regulation would be quite difficult to deal with. So the hope is that we get reasonable regulation, but regulation, once again, is something that can be a roadblock and make things very difficult. They can regulate the exchanges. They can make it very, very difficult to get your money in and out, which I think would be the biggest concern, but they can't kill Bitcoin with regulation.
Yeah, well, I relate to you when you say, you're not techie. I'm not super techie. I come to this from sort of the average person just wanting to save money and be able to plan for the future. And Wolf of All Streets kind of speaks to me because we, especially in the last, I would say, 10 years or since the financial crisis in this country, there has felt like there's been a division between sort of the haves and the have-nots and the super wealthy and everybody else. And so Bitcoin to me offered sort of that equalization or that redistribution of wealth in a more fair way. And I was just kind of curious because I think that it's hard to get the message across in a elevator pitch. Like Bitcoin is so nuanced and complicated that when people ask me about it, it's hard to explain it in a way where people start to figure out that there's a huge problem with the economic system and you have to go down the rabbit hole. So when you explain Bitcoin to people, do you run across that problem, and how do you kind of overcome that and share some of these more basic concepts with them?
I think it's a problem explaining what Bitcoin is if you're trying to do it from a technical perspective. But like I said, especially since COVID, I think explaining to people the perils of money printing and of inflation is something that they generally understand and are familiar with. So I generally start with that as my elevator pitch. Well, price of milk's 20% more than it was 2 years ago. Explain that. Well, okay, that's because of inflation, because of money printing. The price isn't really going up. There's just more money, right? So the supply of money has increased and therefore it's worth less. And Bitcoin fixes that. How? Well, it's deflationary. There'll only be 21 million of them ever. Every 4 years, the new supply, the difficulty is doubled and the new supply is cut in half. Why wouldn't you want to buy something? Why wouldn't you want to hold something that protects you from that inflation? I think that's a pretty easy argument to get people to at least get their feet wet. But what's funny, to be honest, I used to try to get everybody to buy Bitcoin and they would laugh at me in 2017, 18. I was nuts. We were the crazy people.
Yeah.
My friends from Penn, guys on Wall Street, obviously they were not largely supportive. The thing that I've been able to convince them to do is to buy USDC and hold it for yield on Voyager or BlockFi or one of these platforms. So I used to think that Bitcoin was sort of the gateway drug into crypto for everybody, but it really turns out that anyone, certainly my generation, who, like I said, had a savings account that earned interest and understands even the concept of earning interest, they've come in because they can buy a stable coin, which they view as safe, and just hold it and earn 10% a year. And that sent them sort of down the Bitcoin rabbit hole. So that's actually been a very easy sell.
Wow. Wait, so do you feel like your followers are asking you a lot of questions about this? And when you think about the people that you speak to on a daily basis with your podcast or your Twitter feed, what's the profile? Like who are the people asking the questions about Bitcoin? Are they older? Are they younger? Are they men? Are they women? I mean, I think that this space is very dominated by men. So who are the people asking you the most questions?
I think it was CNBC today put out a report that said men were twice as likely to buy crypto as women. And I would have thought it was 10 times.
Yeah.
Based on the community and the people that I interact with. I really would have thought it was 10 to 1. So I think that 2 to 1 is probably inaccurate, to your point. But I think that my followers run the gamut. I think that when you reach a certain point, it's just not that large of a community, right? I mean, how big could the core crypto Twitter community possibly be? 1.5, 2 million people, maybe a little bit. So I think if you get to a few 100,000, you're largely speaking to that community. For me, it's more about outreach to the mainstream. Like, I don't think that I have that much to offer to the community that's already passionate about Bitcoin, is changing their avatar on Twitter to a pudgy penguin or some sort of ape and understands NFTs better than me. My goal has always been the people who are on the fringe, who are considering it, who don't quite understand it, who have those basic questions that I can try to answer for them, or people, who haven't ever heard of it, and maybe we can convince to bring them in. Like, I really believe that it's an important asset, the most important asset that people could ever gain exposure to. So I just want them to hear about it and understand it. And so I really go for the mainstream normie, for lack of a better term, crowd. That's who I want to talk to. And, I want to do it in a language they can understand. So I try to gear the podcast and my content more towards them. Because like I said, we don't need to convince the existing audience.
Well, I'm super passionate about bringing more women in. That's something that I want to show, that this is a space where they could have a community as well. And it's great for saving. And a lot of, women in my peer group make more than the men. So it's a great place to put their money. So what are your thoughts on how we could bring more women into this space?
Don't let them go on crypto Twitter. That'll scare them right out forever. Honestly, I don't really have an answer for that. Like, to me, people are people, and it's reached enough of a level of recognition, I think, that both women and men have heard about it. So I don't know how we actively go out and convince one or the other. I think it will naturally happen. I don't think that it will remain a boys' club. Financial literacy has no preference towards sex, obviously. And I think it's just a generational switch of male female roles. Obviously, like when my parents were in college, women generally became housewives and raised the kids, and that was the role. That's not the case anymore, thank goodness. And so I just think that with that natural evolution, that more women will come into the space. But the thing is, I think they're here, they're just not as vocal about it.
What are your thoughts on just the price action right now? We had a pretty crazy year. We ran it all the way up to 60. Did you think that we were going to go even higher? Did you expect sort of the correction that we saw for a while with the China mining, Elon Musk tweeting? I mean, what are your overall thoughts on the price action this year?
I bought into the more bullish ideas, and like everyone else, got caught up, I think, a bit in the FOMO. I did expect a retrace fully, just not that big, right? So I thought, with the institutional buying, that the floor would be higher. So I thought maybe we'd drop into the low to mid 40s. I never saw 29,000 coming. Not that anything is really a surprise. When you've traded Bitcoin, you know that it's not going to do what you think, and that generally you should never be surprised. But I thought that it would see a retracement. We had sort of the laser eyes phenomenon and a lot of euphoria. And like I said, the idea Bitcoin's going straight to $1 million. It'll never retrace again. It can never go down because this, and this. Well, that's never the case, right? And we learned a very quick and hard lesson. That said, I think the bottom is in and we're headed back up. And I said that when price was 30,000, and I've never really sort of changed that. I think that we're going to see much higher prices this year, but I hate to put timelines on things. I'm such a long-term investor. I just want to see up and to the right, like just see the chart continuing to slowly climb, and I'm happy. And I think that will happen.
How closely do you follow the stock market? You mentioned that there are some stocks that you still have from decades ago.
I still buy stocks. They only go up, right?
I mean, record highs every day.
Listen, I don't agree with the system, but like it's the way that people have acquired generational wealth for over 100 years. And I'm not going to buck it necessarily either. I don't aggressively buy in the same way that I used to, because I used to only basically trade stocks and Forex. But, I think that it's unfortunate that stocks are artificially inflated, but still, I view a lot of tech as not similar to Bitcoin as a store of value in that manner. But like these platforms are the future of everything, right? I own Amazon, I own Apple, I own Google, I own Facebook, I own ARK ETFs. That's the sort of things that I'm still buying. I sort of see them as corollaries to Bitcoin anyways. But yeah, so I still continue. I'm just not as passionate about it as I once was. I think it's kind of, it's fixed. It's fixed, right? It's so funny. People call Bitcoin manipulated. The stock market is manipulated. Mm-hmm. It's a fake floor provided by the Fed.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I'm curious about that because I love macroeconomics, and it seems like we're between a rock and a hard place. We're either printing more money and causing inflation or hyperinflation, or we finally taper, which is probably the right thing to do, and everything crashes. But if everything crashes, that includes Bitcoin. So, kind of out of curiosity, do you think at some point we do need to have a major correction, since everything is so frothy and bubbly and overinflated at this point with the money printer, that will send Bitcoin down, and that would be an opportunity, I guess, to buy again? But how do you look at it in terms of the macro picture?
I don't view Bitcoin as correlated with other assets. And if you zoom out to the entire history of Bitcoin, it's one of the most beautifully uncorrelated, idiosyncratic assets of all time. So yes, you have these moments like March 2020 where everything crashes. Of course, everybody goes risk off. Bitcoin, you forget, is very liquid. In March of 2020, you couldn't sell a bond, literally. So if you had Bitcoin in a bond and you needed to raise capital, you had to sell your Bitcoin. So Bitcoin actually crashed basically 2 weeks before the stock market and bottomed, right? And bounced very hard. So that was a temporary moment, but we saw Bitcoin went back from 4,000 to 65,000, right? So it outpaced the stock market by many, many multiples. I don't see it as correlated. And I don't think that crash this time would have that deleterious effect on Bitcoin. It would be temporary. It would definitely drop at first, but I think it would rise much faster once again.
That's interesting. Well, to start to wrap up, just out of curiosity, with your career, I mean, going from, University of Pennsylvania to life DJing around the world with some big artists to all of a sudden becoming a trader, what's like a life lesson? Like if you could go back and talk to your younger self, what would you tell him?
Oh, first of all, if I could talk to my younger self, I would tell him to save money earlier. I was a complete jackass with my finances until my probably almost my early mid 30s. If I had it, I spent it. There was some experience I wanted. I don't regret any of the experiences, but I would have started saving money earlier, even though I knew that I was supposed to. And every time I tried, I would end up cashing it out anyways. Just, uh, buy a mutual fund for my retirement and cash it out a year later to pay rent or go on a trip, right? Not really responsible. So I would have been more financially responsible. But if I was talking to, other people, even my younger self, first of all, I'd say buy Bitcoin much earlier than I did, of course, but more back to sort of the lesson that we talked about before, which is never let anyone put you in a box, and that you can forge your own path, and that if you're passionate enough and good enough at something, you can be successful in it without taking that standard route. And I think that that's much more true now and much more compelling. I was on a panel yesterday for Benzinga, and we were talking about sort of what the future will look like for Generation Z or iGen millennials. I mean, I really believe in 5 or 10 years that they'll have jobs in the metaverse and won't ever need a job in the real world, and they'll probably outperform their parents dramatically. If you see what's happening like with Axie Infinity in the gaming space and NFTs, we're just scratching the surface of that. And so for people who are younger and understand and have grown up with it, they're going to make just bundles and bundles of money, I think, living a life that's ideal to them, that, maybe is in conflict with what their parents would have dreamed would be ideal for them. So I always tell people, just follow your passion if you have the luxury to do so, right? I'm not going to pretend that there aren't people who just need to go get a job because that's the only option. I was very lucky, but pursue your passions. You only get to live once, and I can tell you get old fast, and all of a sudden those dreams that you had become a bit more out of reach. So I would tell my 20-year-old self to even go harder at DJing, but save a little money.
That's so cool. That's such a great message. And I mean, you probably must feel like it's your calling now to help spread the message about some of these technologies and obviously about Bitcoin, right?
I do. I just want people to have freedom and, to have a hedge, to be able to opt out from this system. It's so fundamentally broken. I mean, we've talked about it, and I'm sure you've talked about it with guests ad nauseum, but for your average person, there's just no way to get ahead if you follow the rules anymore, unfortunately. And nobody teaches you that. Like I said, there's no financial education in school. Nobody teaches you about inflation until you go down that rabbit hole by yourself, start reading books, start listening to podcasts, engage on crypto Twitter a bit. You don't really understand how problematic that is, that you're just on a hamster wheel and you're probably working for the same wage every single year while things get more expensive. You're saving your money in dollars, which is losing its value. I used to believe, my parents taught me, save dollars.
Yeah.
But we got interest back then, and so Bitcoin really is, in my mind, the best vehicle to opt out of that system. And I think even if people only want to touch 5% of their portfolio with it, 10%, 1%. It's important to try to send it to someone, to experience it, to interact with it. And I really believe that most people who do that, as long as they're not the one who bought 65,000 the day it happened and then sold it at 50 and never come back, but I think for most people who interact with it, they'll be sold.
Agree. Well, I know you're a long outlook, big picture guy, but price prediction for the end of the year.
Hard for me to give a price prediction for the end of the year because, it's sort of a fool's errand to put timing on a prediction, but I think 100 grand is easily within reach this year. That's a measly 2x. That's nothing for Bitcoin, right? We went from 3,800 to 65,000 basically in 14 months until May. So if you think about it, not in terms of the number, yes, it's a little daunting to say it'll go up $53,000, but if you think it merely has to double, which Bitcoin has done almost every year of its existence, I think that's well within reach. And, my thinking on the cycle top for this cycle, I have no idea what the correction would be like after, is probably in the 200 to 250 range. And I got that number not by being a permable or by throwing darts at a board. I had my team take all of the predictions they could find about 6 months ago. So they took 100 different predictions, stock to flow, willy woo, everything, and they took an average, and that's where it landed.
Wow, interesting. Okay, well,
Yeah,
final question, Mr. DJ. You obviously still must love music. So, what are you
I do.
listening to right now? Who are you liking? Give us some jams.
I'm going to be honest with you. I listen to like 90s hip hop and classic funk, soul, and R&B all the time. And I don't really listen to that much new music unless it's with my kids. I think I'm just stuck in college and the high school years the older you get. Now I'm like my parents who told me how bad the music was that I was listening to. And they were like, oh, we were listening to rock that had meaning and the words were so, compelling. Your rap is noise. Well, now I tell my kids she's only 6, but your music is noise is bad. So I really listened to tons of Stevie Wonder and Marvin Gaye and stuff like that. And then of course, Biggie and Tribe Called Quest, De La Soul. That was always sort of like my heart, musically. And so that's where I'm at. I've been on a real kick where I don't listen to that much new music and just focus on the old stuff that I love.
Love it. Love it. Okay, and how can people find you?
Very easy. At Scott Melker, SCOTTMELKER on Twitter. Everything else is linked there.